On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Beth Falder. She's the AVP of Data Management and Analytics at Nuvance Health. We're going to be talking about how do you quiet the noise? What do I mean by that? Well, leaders have a lot of pressure on them these days. They have to implement really interesting new solutions that are coming out, seems by the minute, by the day, and they still have to deliver on what they've been working on. I think it's a delicate balancing act, and we're going to talk about Beth, about how she finds those opportunities to push into those new areas, and what happens when you start doing things just a little bit. Does that actually get you far enough along? So, Beth, excited to have you on talk to us about this topic. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me today. Looking forward to diving in.
All right. Before we start, can you tell us what Nuvance Health does?
Sure. So we are an integrated health delivery network here in Connecticut and New York. We serve primarily the Hudson Valley and Western Connecticut regions. We have 7 hospitals in our network and a large number of primary care and specialty offices to serve our communities.
I guess this is really interesting. I've talked to some other people about the FOMO side of technology. And I guess, that might kind of weave its way in here, because obviously there's a lot of just technology that has been developed in the last 10 years. I feel like we've just been seeing, especially in the data space, we're just seeing a lot of development of how to actually shift into advanced solutions. It seems to be maybe an interesting time for a leader, a technology executive, to have these options to be able to deliver business solutions. I guess when you're looking at yourself or just the industry and you're always trying to evaluate, hey, where am I jumping in? How am I evaluating all these different options that are coming to me? How do you start? Just maybe that's the high level kickoff point.
It's tough because, especially, since Gen AI was announced, it seems to have ignited a passion within all of our clinicians, and they're all scientists at heart. So they're super excited about this new development and how they can better the care that they deliver to the patients using these new tools. Yet we still have fundamental base problems that we have to solve, and only a limited amount of resources to be able to tackle a number of these issues. So where we typically start is in governance. We have to have that buy-in from the senior leaders on down to help us align what we really target as initiatives for our organization, what's going to have the biggest impact to both our operations as well as the delivery of care to our patients.
So whenever I hear data governance, my mind immediately goes to, this is going to take forever. I'm going to be here. This is where we slow down. We were on the fast track. Now you're telling me I'm going to slow down, because governance typically doesn't go by fast. I mean, I could be wrong. You can clarify that. But I guess when you're dealing with executives, and you mentioned Gen AI, and you have technical stakeholders, technical users, so they are not afraid of jumping in, getting their hands dirty. Leaders want to jump to that stage. They want to jump to that point. And I guess you're sometimes having to say, well, let's talk about some of those data governance factors, and let's talk about those aspects. How do you keep their interest piqued while you're telling them, I need to do all this other stuff here? Because that's a little bit of a maybe rub.
Yeah, and it's tricky. And I know I don't please everyone. And certainly there's a level of frustration sometimes when I send out that, we need to go to governance with this. But the reality is that we are a healthcare organization who has an IT and a data delivery team, but that's not all that we do. So we have to be very delicate with the resources and use them strategically so that we get the biggest bang for our buck. Sometimes it's that build versus buy discussion as well. So there are things that we can natively do in-house and we're going to get a great solution, but it'll take some time. Or do we talk with some vendors about where there are partnership opportunities and what should we move forward with? Gen AI definitely created noise in this space. I think I probably get about 10 to 15 emails a day from different vendors. They are approaching people directly outside of IT to pitch their products. It is absolutely deafening. So trying to narrow down and hone in on what is going to be important and what really is worth our time versus what's just noise, it's brutal, very difficult.
So yeah, in the last, let's say 18 months, 2 years, there's been a lot of discussion within the data space, data leaders now having to figure out how they want to deal with Gen AI. And I'm not even sure we're far enough down this path that there are real full-fledged solutions that companies are moving into. But there is a bit of learning curve. There is a bit of, I need to understand, because everybody's still trying to adjust and figure out how am I going to take advantage of this. How do you balance that discovery piece, right? And it's probably a cool piece because we all love to learn new things. But how do you balance? Hey, I need to go figure some of this stuff out, this legwork, because my executives obviously are hearing about it. It's on every news channel, every third article. How do you balance that?
And that's tough too. It's definitely bled into my personal time and how I drive into work, what I'm listening to. And it's everything because we're approached all the time from different aspects of it. And it's not just the Gen AI piece now, because they've learned about Gen AI and where before the AI ML stuff was kind of in the background. Everything is to the forefront and everybody wants everything and they all want to dive right in. It's exciting. It's great to see this much engagement. I haven't been this important for a while. So everybody loves to come and tell me about their projects, and that's great. Can't do them all. So that's the frustrating part of this whole conversation. And then also the legacy of data debt that we have. And let's face it, we've been putting data into these electronic medical systems for years. We didn't structure it very well. We didn't think about, oh, well, by the time I put this in at some stage, I'm going to want to start to do machine learning. That wasn't on our radar. So there's so much cleanup that we have to do in the background. Thankfully, tools are getting better and better, so the cleanup lessens a little bit, but the work is still there. And so we have to do foundational work where you don't actually even get any outputs. You're just building that basis to then springboard to the exciting stuff, and getting people to understand that's a challenge too.
You said so much there. I'm like, there's 95 questions now, but let's maybe peel back a little bit on that one statement, because engineering teams, software engineering teams, software development teams, they leverage that term technical debt because of decisions made in the past, right? I've actually been talking about how great a term that is, because that actually is very explainable to everyone so that we understand I am being held accountable for decisions made previous to this time. Maybe I was a part of it, maybe I wasn't. Don't know. Data technical debt isn't something we really talk about as data professionals, because a lot of times we're in this odd space of it really doesn't matter because the deliverable was always due yesterday, versus if you have functionality that has to go into a software product, we all kind of know that this takes time. I think it's not that's a double standard. I think it's an expectation. I've said this before. A piece of functionality that goes into software, it is going to take X amount of days, weeks, months to have that happen. Data, and I had a guest say this, is because in the end, an executive could take an analyst before, stick it in Excel and go, here you go. I can do it on my own. Obviously, now the volume of data is getting too much to do that. So when you're talking about some of these decisions made in the past, I actually start thinking about going, some of these decisions have been forced upon data professionals, some haven't, but some of it's because you have to go fast, because the executive, the stakeholder could just go into Excel, access, and start finding a way, right? Life will find a way. When you're starting to now look at the ground work that you need to do to bring in these advanced solutions, where before no one was wanting to give you the time because we needed the report yesterday and I needed it before you can even get to the data warehouse. How are you positioning that? Because that seems to be not much different than 12 years ago. I need to go build additional functionality into the warehouse to get this report, versus I'm doing this now because we want to put Gen AI, I use air quotes, people, for the solution now.
Well, and not only that, so before it was that traditional data warehouse structured component, now we have these data lakes and lake houses and all of the integrations that we're expected to bring in to deliver true insight and value of things that were beyond our control before. So we're talking unstructured data is the biggest opportunity within healthcare for sure. Those, again, were decisions made by others that we'll just put it in notes. We won't need to do it. Now we realize, oh, those notes were critical and we could find out so much more from it. Oh, but there's a lot of work to be done to read those notes and bring them to a format that then we can provide analytics to solve your problems. So the problem is huge, but we try and boil it down to what is critical, how can we do individual components and iterate upon that to bring the value as quick as we can. There's also great innovation happening with all of the big leaders in cloud surrounding healthcare and what we do in healthcare. So thankfully, their innovations and the millions of dollars that they can spend to build that foundation, we can leverage to bring to our own organizations. So it's, again, that public-private partnership. We can do things ourselves, but sometimes we do rely on our partners so that we can innovate and move faster.
Interesting. I guess as you're looking at solutions that you want to focus on, right, and you want to start evaluating, and maybe you've already done that, maybe you are doing that, doesn't matter. How do you look at those opportunities, right? Obviously, I know stakeholder involvement's there as well, but also we know there might be some technical debt that needs to be dealt with. How are you evaluating, let's say, hey, I do want to use a new piece of technology. It doesn't even have to be Gen AI. It could be pretty much any piece of technology. How do you balance that? Hey, I do need to do some legwork versus the opportunity does present itself and it could be beneficial to the company.
Right. So it's a great question. It's right top of mind because we're doing our capital requests for next year. So I'm trying to get the budget for what I want to do. And a lot of it is what solutions can we bring in that will solve more than one problem? And that's where looking at solutions out to market, developing on our own, there are things that we could build today for that foundational growth to other departments. So I'm trying to see what I could do for research alongside our population health initiatives, alongside our quality initiatives, alongside our HR initiatives. Data lakes brought all that information together in a very unrefined format. ML capabilities allow us to catalog it in a different way to then bring forward to self-service type options in the future.
And I guess as you're kind of, planning, you are now anticipating potential new solutions, right? And things have progressed very quickly, even from last year's probably budgeting cycle to this year's budgeting planning cycle. How do you estimate the next year's budgeting cycle? Because also, you mentioned the major cloud providers, the major AI players are rolling out solutions that are maybe even vertical specific very quickly. It's happening. I don't know, I'm not going to say daily, but it's happening very quickly. It's happening weekly, monthly. We're seeing new solutions being rolled out within products. Do you anticipate some of that stuff? Are you starting to are you just planning for stuff that has to happen regardless? Or how do you account for the fact that just the speed at which things are moving might render a plan for next year completely moot? And how do you go to executives and say, hey, by the way, we did this in June, but it's now December and this is all out the window?
Yeah. It's hard because you can't anticipate where Google's going to head next, where Microsoft's going to go, where AWS is going to go. And you have to hedge your bets a little bit. The one good thing about healthcare is that we are actually pretty good sharers. So there's some professional networks that we can participate in and talk to other healthcare organizations about what they see in the future and learn from each other. I think that is the only way we're going to move forward because we can't keep up with this space. It's impossible. It's so fast right now. But Shy is one, Valid AI is another one. They're just standing these up to bring healthcare organizations together to talk through some of these challenges.
When you're talking to executives and you're talking about the pace of which things are developing, and obviously there's so much discussion around Gen AI right now that executives might have different visions of where the solution's going. Is there a misalignment between how you see these products helping and supporting the customer as a technologist versus where executives are hoping or where they're anticipating it might be taking the company?
Yeah. And it's tough because we think more about health and health benefits and which service lines and which clinical opportunities are there. And then you also think of safety and what is the safest path forward with these new technologies. And that's where clinical might not be the right path forward, which is going to frustrate clinicians. But the safest path forward is going to be your back office functions. So your HR things, your budget things, your finance, those operations, let's put some Gen AI capabilities there because it's not going to harm any patient. Clinically, that's where I think we need to go beyond our four walls and work with other healthcare organizations to figure out clinically which are the best use cases for Gen AI capabilities amongst all the noise, because the clinicians, as I said, are being flooded with vendors to say, and I can make this huge difference. And they're all startups. So that's the other challenge. How do you evaluate companies and organizations from this new perspective? Because we've never worked in this space before.
I guess if you're thinking about, I mean, what I just heard was, and you can, if I say something incorrect, please stop me, but there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in lower risk areas, but potentially the business is built around data from the actual field, right? Collecting these clinician notes. That also represents the biggest opportunity, because that's where there'll be new opportunities generated, because we're going to see stuff out of that data that we would have never as humans been able to see. That risk is higher because obviously that touches lives. And I'm almost hearing like this bit of a conflict of that is maybe where the biggest opportunity is, but also your healthcare company, doesn't seem like a bleeding edge type of entity. You can't take certain risks. You have to be a little bit more cautious. I guess, how do you kind of balance that? Because it seems like this makes such obvious sense. Look at that clinical data. But then on the flip side is someone has to get to a point where they go, we trust this as much as we trust the clinician, not to say that people don't make mistakes or machines don't hallucinate. But that seems to be like it's going to be a hurdle.
Absolutely. And that's where regulation is starting to come in this space. A lot of the FDA regulations about what can be used in a clinical space with AI technologies going to become more rigorous as we move forward. You also have to have that human in the loop element, but then at what stage is the human in the loop still effective? Or are they just passing through to say, oh, I can always trust AI. I'm just going to click yes, rather than clinically evaluating what the AI came up with to make sure it's relevant to your patient. It's new waters. We don't know where this is going to head, but we have to at least put some guide rails in place to protect ourselves. Obviously liability, we have to think about that. And we would never want to put our patients at risk. So treading carefully in this space is the way we have to go for the next short term until we figure out a little bit further along where we want to head. Back office, a lot easier. Still risk. I mean, you could risk your entire revenue if you get the model wrong, but it's not going to harm a person. And that, to us, is the most important piece to really protect.
Yeah, I mean that makes a ton of sense. I've actually talked to a few people now in the healthcare industry, and it's becoming very apparent that is the best place to start. I mean, somebody actually mentioned just simply identifying scheduling opportunities for patients. 18 months ago, we're supposed to do this, but they never followed up, and there's no way for the system to really follow up and actually go in there. And I don't even know if it's really AI. I mean, some of this stuff is, when I hear about it, I'm like, some of this is really based on our data being in better order and shape so that we can actually be more actionable on top of the data versus I need a Gen AI solution to interact. Now, maybe there is a AI that could reach out and, have that dialogue with John or Jane Doe and go, hey, you were supposed to schedule this 16 weeks ago. You're late, and keep following up. Maybe, I don't know. But do you see some of the things, and you mentioned data governance and some of the data, technical debt that's out there. Are some of the things even more just lower hanging fruit that we're going to see because we're going to go back and work on some of this data plumbing?
I think so. And piping into, again, those notes, because some of the risk factors that we couldn't capture before because they weren't discrete fields, we can start to see those risk factors to identify those patients that probably aren't going to take as good a care of themselves as they should and are likely to go downhill. We want to stay on top of them. Somebody who might have struggles finding a ride to their appointment, and that's why they always cancel. That would be in a doctor's note. Let's get on top of that. And then we could start to arrange transportation for them or help them along the path. So there are those elements that aren't clinical decisions, but more clinical support areas that we could dive into first that would have huge impact on our patient populations.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's funny as you're talking about this, I'm like, oh, you know what? I was supposed to go get some blood work done for a lab like a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't do my fasting because I screwed it up. And they're like, you can't come in. And I was like, I haven't rescheduled it. And normally I'm on top of stuff, but you just reminded me of the opportunity of no one's reached out to me because as far as they're concerned, it's my responsibility. And it is my responsibility, but it's interesting that we're talking about leveraging the data to help in that responsibility. Because obviously as a company, you guys want to put the patient first. I guess last question, because I'm kind of curious about this. You mentioned the legacy data as we're looking at some of these areas to go fix. Is there a parallel between what you mentioned about the less risky back office versus some of the clinical data, but even some of these support things that you and I have been mentioning in the last 3-4 minutes? Some of that's going to require some cleanup of clinical data to go in and go into those notes. And I don't know if this is a human that has to go in there or there are systems within the healthcare space that can actually go in there and start parsing out and being intelligent enough to understand those notes. I mean, can you maybe talk to us a little bit about that?
So there are actually, I know Amazon and Google and Microsoft, they're all doing work on notes to figure out the clinical relevant points to take out of those notes and to create those discrete fields to move forward in. I think that's where we're going to have to leverage those big partners to help us along the journey because notes are huge. It's so pervasive in what we do. And human beings typing things into a computer, well, we're not always that great about that. So helping to normalize that data and structure it to provide meaningful output is going to be something we'll have to farm out, I think, a little bit, and then leverage that knowledge to move forward.
Absolutely. I know you got to get back to getting the actual work done, getting some of this stuff fixed. So I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing. If someone does want to reach out to you, I mean, we covered a lot of different areas. I mean, I know we didn't get super deep in any one area, but I think we covered a good breadth of the topic. If somebody did want to reach out to you to touch base, what's a good way of contacting you?
LinkedIn is probably best. You can just find me, Beth Falder. Thankfully, there aren't that many folders out there. So if you do a search, you'll probably find me straight away at Nuvance Health.
All right. I definitely appreciate your time. It was great having you on. And that is it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, 2 things. 1, I think this is a great topic. I think we covered a lot of some of the challenges executives have to deal with. If you're in leadership, you're hearing a lot about Gen AI, a lot of just advanced technologies that your company may implement. It's not always that straightforward. I'm sure you guys, as a group, are shaking your heads, going, "Yes, this is not easy." So share this with somebody else. It's great to kind of also maybe see if there's solutions out there that people are seeing, and you guys can maybe share that amongst the community, because I definitely feel, as Beth mentioned, it is especially in the healthcare space, it's very shared knowledge and camaraderie, and I like that. So please share this episode with somebody else. I'd love to see if it helps others. Like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the podcast is going. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.